Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Are We on the Same Page? I'm your host, Dave Thomas Rocker, and today I'm going to discuss what I think is a really important topic and really relevant to our society. Probably more relevant than ever right now, in my opinion, at least here in the United States. So, I'm going to talk about prejudice, which is a very complicated issue, especially understanding it. Why do we have it? And then what we should do about it. I think this is very important, and I think the sooner we can answer this question as a society, the better. So, anyway, let's begin. So, before I go into this, I think I first have to define prejudice, and here's a simple definition. So, prejudice is based on stereotypes and generalizations we hear about groups of people. And if you look at the word prejudice, prejudge. So it's exactly that. I mean, stereotypes are a manifestation of prejudice because we assume that certain groups of people have certain outstanding characteristics. I mean, like, people used to, a lot of people say Jews have big noses or Jews are greedy or, I don't want to talk about too many stereotypes because I want to get in trouble for it. But you've heard them all. I mean, Mexicans are lazy or whatever. I mean, I don't want to go into it because I don't want to get in trouble for saying too many stereotypes. I don't agree with them, by the way. But I'm sure you guys have heard a lot of stereotypes. And, so that's kind of the basis for prejudice. And the problem with prejudice is once we start believing these stereotypes, we can act on them in very, very bad ways. I mean, especially when we start blaming groups of people for certain problems in our society. I think the most extreme example that I can think of was the Holocaust. I mean, what happened? There was obviously a lot of anti-Semitism. I mean, this was nothing new. There's been anti-Semitism throughout most of the last 3,000 years since the Jews have been around, and I mean, I'm sure you guys all know what happened in Nazi Germany. I mean, it just escalated, and the reason why I think we had the Holocaust was the Jews became a scapegoat. I mean, Jews were perceived as greedy, and there was a depression, a very terrible depression in Germany, and I think 30% of the country was out of work. People were very poor. People were very desperate. Along came Adolf Hitler, and by the way, he was elected, and he made his plans clear to the German people that he intended to kill all the Jews in the world, and they voted for. I mean, it seems ludicrous to us today. Maybe not so ludicrous anymore with Trump, but I mean, it's pretty amazing that someone like that, a madman like Hitler, could get into power and be elected to kill all the Jews in the world. Fortunately, he didn't succeed, but he did kill about one third of all the Jews in the world, most of the Jews in Europe. Very, very, very sad. And it was just because people, he gave people a scapegoat. He said the Jews are responsible for our problems. They're taking away our jobs. They're greedy. They're money grubbers. We got to get rid of them, and then we'll be better off. And unfortunately, enough people agreed with him that he got elected. And we had the Nazi Party and we had World War II. Fortunately, the Allies won World War II and defeated Hitler. I hate to think what would have happened if he won. That's the most extreme example I can think of. Of course, it's not just Jews. I mean, in America, in the United States, it's mostly African Americans that have been the victims of terrible prejudice for most of our history. I mean, it was a basis for slavery. We had slavery in this country for, while we were a country, we had slavery for almost 100 years, but we even had slavery before we were a country. I'm sure you guys all know about the triangle trade from Africa. The Europeans, took these, members of African tribes and traded them to the New World to become slaves there. And it was the basis for slavery in the South for over 100 years. Very, very sad. But it wasn't just the United States. We've had slavery. I mean, most of the world. The interesting thing is that most of the world has had slavery for most of human history. And I'm glad we don't have it anymore in the United States, at least not institutionalized slavery. I guess you can talk about other forms of slavery. You could even maybe say, a lot of employers are slaves to their bosses, and in some ways they are. But, I don't want to go into what is slavery. That's just one example I'm giving. But, obviously, prejudice is very, very bad, and some very horrible atrocities have occurred because of it. So we all know it's bad, and I think we kind of know what it is. And I want to give a few more definitions before I continue. I mean, a lot of people equate racism with prejudice. They're not exactly the same. They're similar. Racism, I think, is actually a form of prejudice. Racism is, and prejudice can apply to any group of people. They don't have to be a race. They don't even have to be a nationality. We can be prejudiced, ageism, sexism, you name it. I mean, we can be, are prejudiced against homosexuals, prejudice against any demographic group, basically, any group of people. Prejudice can apply to that, but racism specifically applies to races. So that's a more specific form of prejudice, and it's a little more obvious. But I think every form of prejudice is bad, not just racism. And then there's also something called bigotry. This is another kind of specific form of prejudice. A bigot is someone who they're more extreme. I think. I mean, bigot. The way I understand bigotry, bigots are outright about it. They admit that they're prejudiced. I mean, there was a very popular TV show in the 1970s called All in the Family. I'm sure you guys have all heard of that show. It was Carroll O'Connor as Archie Bunker. He was supposed to be kind of a typical American bigot in the 1970s, and there were a lot of them. I mean, there aren't so many bigots anymore, but I think there's still a lot of prejudice and racism. But I think what's happened, people didn't used to have a problem saying they didn't like other races or other groups. And Archie Bunker was kind of typical of that. I mean, he would be outright about how he didn't like blacks, how he didn't like Jews, how he basically didn't like anybody who wasn't like him. And a lot of people were like that. He wasn't alone. I'd say a big portion of America was like that. And I think All in the Family was a really good show because I think it helped end a lot of bigotry. And I think it even lessened our prejudice for a while. Prejudice seems to come in waves. I thought prejudice, at least I thought racism was by and large over in the United States during the 90s. I mean, I don't know if you remember the 90s, there was a big push for being politically correct, to at least say the right, term for things. Like instead of, blacks started becoming African Americans. Because, I always thought black was a funny name anyway. Black people are not black, and white people are not white. I mean, black people are more brown, and white people are more beige. And, there's different kinds of, if you're talking about color of skin, there's different kinds of blacks. I mean, there's African Americans, and then there's people from the Caribbean, people from India. They all kind of have dark skin. Are you going to lump them all into being black, even though they're different races and totally different groups? you know, uh, so I think being PC kind of makes you a little bit more aware of what you're talking about. Um, but anyway. So the good news is that bigotry seems to be kind of bygone. But now I'm going to talk about intolerance. I mean, I guess I don't know if this is a form of prejudice. It's kind of I think intolerance is more kind of a consequence of prejudice. I mean, intolerance is when you're basically, you hate a group of people, or you don't respect a group of people because you have disdain for them. You think they're inferior. I mean, I'd say intolerance is a pretty bad and pretty extreme form of prejudice. Prejudice doesn't necessarily mean that you hate a group of people. You just assume certain things about them. But prejudice, I think, can lead to intolerance, and intolerance is very, very bad. Um, I think once we become intolerant, we're really on a bad road. You know. So all these things are really bad. And so I think hopefully I've convinced most of you guys about the dangers and the extreme problems connected with prejudice. And now I want to, and then tolerance. Tolerance is the opposite of intolerance. So obviously, since intolerance is very bad, tolerance is really good. And, if we're tolerant, that means we're respectful. That means even if we don't agree, I mean, there's different things you can be prejudiced about. You can be prejudiced about opinions. I know I am. I'm guilty of some of this, by the way. I think we all are to some extent. I think all of us, at least at some level, are a little bit prejudiced in various ways. Even, there's forms of prejudice we're not even, a lot of it's subconscious. A lot of it's just so built into the way that we've been raised and the way, we've been kind of acclimatized to our society that I think most of us are prejudiced in various ways without even realizing it. And, I think tolerance is really important because I think we all have our own opinions and we have differences of opinion. I mean, I know I do. I'm not a big fan of mainstream religion. I've said that in many of my videos. And I think a big problem I have is that I think I'm probably way too prejudiced against religious people. I probably am. That's probably the group of people I'm most prejudiced against, actually. Most of my life I've been agnostic. I've even been atheist. Now I'm spiritual. I'm spiritual, but not religious in the traditional sense. And I don't know why, but most of my life I've just hated mainstream religion. I never liked the Bible. I try to think outside the box. I try to think for myself. And to me, a lot of religion, I'd say most of religion in the world involves a lot of dogma, and I just hate dogma. I mean, I'm not alone. I think a lot of intellectuals hate dogma. I know Einstein did. It was one of the things he hated more than anything else. But the problem with that, yeah, it's fine if you don't like dogma and you don't like hypocrisy and you don't like brainwashing, but you still have to be respectful of those who maybe you consider them brainwashed. Maybe you see some religious nuts and maybe you think, oh God, why are they thinking the way they're thinking? Why don't they think for themselves? But, I know I'm guilty of this. And I'm probably not tolerant enough of them. I mean, for all I know, maybe the Bible's true. I think the 99.9999% chance it's false, but there's always that 0.0000001% chance it's true. Maybe it's not my right to say it's false. And even if it is false, even if I believe that, I probably don't have the right to tell other people that because there's a lot of religious people who've they've geared their whole lives around studying the Bible and understanding whatever religion they are, be it Christianity or Islam or Judaism or Buddhism or Taoism or whatever. I mean, we have to be tolerant of every group, including religious groups. And that can be, at least for me, that's a hard thing to do. So I have to learn to be more tolerant and more respectful. I guess most of my life I haven't been so much. So I'm guilty of. I'm probably guilty of a very bad form of prejudice, namely prejudice against religious groups. So I got to work on that. And anyway, so now I want to talk about the psychology of prejudice. And there's big books on this. I haven't studied this much. I don't think anybody really knows. I mean, if we knew why there was prejudice, if we had a really good understanding of why we have prejudice in our society, I think we'd be able to do something about it. I think we would have eradicated it by now. If we really understood it really well and really understood society a lot better, I think we would know how to eradicate prejudice. But we haven't figured out how to do that yet. And like I said, a few minutes ago in the 90s, I kind of thought prejudice was by and large over in America. It's gotten worse. I'd say it's gotten a lot worse during this millennium. I think starting with 9/11. I think 9/11 was a big source of prejudice for a lot of Americans because, once the World Trade Center was bombed, destroyed, it was destroyed by bin Laden and the Taliban, and they were an extremist, Islamic group, and that led to a lot of terrible prejudice against Muslims and Arabs, and it led to the war on terrorism, which lasted for 20 years. And I think I think most of that was unnecessary. I mean, yeah, sure, I'm not denying that 9/11 was a terrible event. 3,000 people were killed, as many as in Pearl Harbor. And, it was a very terrible thing. But, I remember it was like 3 weeks later, our president at the time, he gave a big presidential address. He said, "You're either with us or you're with the terrorists." And I don't think that was a very good thing he said, because he kind of marked a battle line among Americans. He said, if you're not, if you're with the terrorists, then what exactly do you mean by that? I mean, that can be interpreted a lot of ways. Like, I think a lot of people interpreted that as just being pro-Islam. I mean, I guess, especially shortly after 9/11, if you were Islamic, you might have been misinterpreted as being on the side of the Taliban, which I think is very unfortunate. I mean, I was in Tanzania in 2015. I took a safari with my uncle there, and I was very impressed. One thing that really impressed me when I was in Tanzania was that there are Muslims and Christians that have no problems with each other. They live together. They even have brothers and sisters, people in the same family. Some of them are Christians, some of them are Muslim. As a matter of fact, our tour guide was a Muslim, and he had a brother who was a pastor of a Catholic church, and we even visited a church, and they got along just fine. And I met a lot of Muslims on my trip, and they were all very nice. I didn't feel threatened by any Muslims at all when I was in Tanzania, and I'm Jewish. And this is another thing I've been guilty of. I Most of my life I've been pretty prejudiced against Arabs, and now I regret it. I even got in trouble. If you want to know the reason I was fired from Wolfram Research, that's where I worked from 2000 to 2003. I said a very racist comment, probably the most racist comment I ever said in my life against Arabs. This is maybe just a few months after 9/11, and eventually it got me fired. And I shouldn't have said it. Fortunately, there were no Arabs at Wolfram, but the personnel was very upset by what I said, and now I regret it. I shouldn't have said that. We have to be tolerant, but I haven't really talked about. I guess I've talked about some personal experience. Why, I don't know. I haven't read much on why there's prejudice in our society. I think I know some of the reasons. I mean, they talk about a few of them here. Maybe I'll just go over these first. So, self-justification. Yeah, I mean, we tend to we tend to think that whatever group we belong to, we're superior. I guess that's kind of a natural tendency. I mean, we're all selfish in one way or another, and actually, it kind of serves us to be selfish. I mean, like if you think about when you fly on a commercial airplane, before you take off, they explain to you all the safety procedures, and they tell you about the oxygen masks, and they always tell you to put yours on first and then help others, like your children. And there's a good reason they tell you that. It's not that they're telling you to be selfish. It's telling you that because, I mean, yeah, maybe you imagine what would happen if there was an accident and the oxygen went out on the airplane. And yeah, maybe you really want to help your kid. Maybe you want to put the oxygen mask on your kid right away so they can survive, they can breathe. But what's going to happen to you? I mean, you might even be hurting your kid by doing that. Maybe because you can't breathe. Maybe you're struggling to breathe and you're trying to get the oxygen mask on your kid and it's really, really difficult. Maybe you just manage it, maybe you don't. Maybe the kid dies because you didn't put yours on first. If you put yours on first, you can breathe, and then it's a lot easier to help your kid, right? So that's kind of an example of why it would serve us to be selfish. And I think selfishness is a big reason for prejudice because, we tend to think that we're superior. It's kind of natural. It's just an aspect of our selfishness. But I think, here's what I think about all this. It's okay to be selfish. We're all selfish to some extent. I know I'm selfish. I've been told this by many, many people, mostly my parents. I act selfish. A lot of that's because I'm on the spectrum. I don't understand people that well. I'm probably a lot less selfish than I've ever been in my life. But um, I'm not trying to justify being selfish. All I'm just saying is I think we all are to some extent, and I think we kind of need to be a little bit. But here's the thing. I mean, yeah, it's natural to think that whatever group we belong to is superior to other groups. That's wrong. See, I think it's a problem when you believe you're superior. I don't think any group of people is superior to any other group in any way. Superiority, I hate that. Nobody's superior. Just, get that out of your thinking. Don't think of any group as superior to any other group, especially your group. White supremacy. A lot of people think it's a good thing. I think it's a horrible thing. I remember about 5 years ago, some philosopher, on Meetup was posting a bunch of philosophy questions. He thought they were really deep and important questions. One of the questions he asked was, is white supremacy a problem? And I thought it was a big joke. I mean, I said, this is a no-brainer. I said, of course it's a problem. I said, and anybody who thinks it isn't a problem is part of the problem. That's what I think. I still think that. Supremacy out the window. We're not superior. None of us are. We all have our strengths and our weaknesses. And I think we're all here for a reason. And it's just a very bad attitude to think that you're superior to anybody else. I don't think that anymore. And if I ever start to think that, I stop myself. So that's one reason. And, also authoritarian personality. I hate authoritarianism. Maybe that's one reason I hate mainstream religion. It tends to be pretty authoritarian. I hate authoritarianism. I mean, who gives anybody just because someone's in some position of power, what makes them an authority? I mean, I learned this a long time ago. There's a difference between being authoritative and authoritarian. Authoritative means you have power by virtue of your knowledge, and authoritarian means you have knowledge by virtue of your power. No, no, I hate authoritarianism. Should be out the window. Einstein had a famous quote. He said, "For rebelling against every possible form of authority, fate has punished me by making me an authority." But he was authoritative. He was not authoritarian. And I've known a lot of authoritarian people throughout my life, and I hate it, you know and I wish we didn't have it. So that's a big basis for prejudice too. If you're authoritarian like Trump is obviously he's like authoritarian to the nth power, and what he says goes in his mind, and unfortunately, about 40% of America goes along with him for no good reason. So he's a very, very dangerous, in my opinion, authoritarian person. I just hope to God he loses the upcoming election. Harris isn't like that at all. I'd say Harris is authoritative, but certainly not authoritarian. And then frustration. Yeah, like I was talking about the Holocaust. I was talking about, when there was the Depression in Germany, and I'm sure most of the German people were very, very frustrated, when that was going on, and they were looking for scapegoats. So, when you get frustrated, it's easy to point the finger at others and blame them for it and think that, by victimizing them, it'll help you. So those are some pretty bad reasons for prejudice, but I think there's more. I've come up with some of my own reasons. And, I couldn't find any good slides on this, but I think, you think about prejudice. Just think about it for a minute. Were you prejudiced as a kid? I mean, I don't think anybody is born prejudiced. It's not natural. I remember when I was a little kid, I went to an elementary school in Cleveland. There were a lot of African American kids at this school, and I didn't think anything of them. I didn't think, they were inferior. I didn't even really think they were different. They were just people with a different skin color. That was all I really thought. And then I'd hear gradually over the years, oh, there's black riots, or even my parents, my grandfather used to call them Schwarzies. There was a lot of intolerance in my family. There was actually a lot of prejudice against African Americans. Not so much from my parents, but from my grandparents. Neither of my mom's parents liked African Americans. They both called them Schwarzies, and They both thought that they were, more likely to be criminals and that they, just stay away from, basically. And unfortunately, I got into some of that thinking myself. When you're surrounded by this kind of environment where you're around people who doesn't like a different group of people, especially if they're like people you're really close to, like your family or your close friends, and they're telling you all this stuff, naturally you're going to pick up on it. I mean, especially if you're one of these people, one of these drones, that doesn't think for themselves. Fortunately, I've never considered myself a drone. I've always thought outside the box. I've always been a skeptic. And I've always tended to question what people say and what people think. And if you don't do that, I think it's very easy to become prejudiced because you hear it. You hear it from others, and then you start believing in it yourself. And I see a lot of that now. I mean, look at what just happened. Look at like 2 weeks ago, Trump has said his crazy thing about how the Haitian immigrants were eating pets in Springfield, Ohio, which is a total lie. And, unfortunately, a lot of Americans believe that now. Even though the woman who started this rumor, she was someone who tweeted, because she couldn't find her cat. Her cat was in her basement. She assumed that some Haitian immigrant ate her cat. And then 2 days later, she found it in her basement. And then she recanted it. She said, I was wrong. I found my cat. But, of course, Trump picked on it right away, and Vance promoted the myth, and now there's still a lot of Americans that think, that the Haitians are pet eaters, horrible, horrible rumor that just got propagated because, some authoritarian asshole promoted this fucking myth. So watch for that. Watch for that. Don't fall victim to it. Think for yourself you know and so I think that's the biggest reason for prejudice. We're not born prejudiced. It gets taught. And there's a very good song. It's a very sad song, but I'm sure you guys have heard the song "What the World Needs Now Is Love" by Jackie DeShannon. There was also a song called "Abraham, Martin, and John" by Dion. They were both songs about prejudice and why we should get along, why we should be tolerant. And there was a DJ named Tom Clay who in 1971 made a medley of both of those songs. And if you guys have heard this song, it's a beautiful song, but it might make you cry. It's just he plays both songs kind of intermittently with each other, and then he has recordings of the assassinations of JFK and Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy. All terrible acts of intolerance, all terrible assassinations. These were three guys who were trying to fight prejudice and racism and trying to bring the world together, and they all got assassinated. And I don't know why, but it seems like just about everybody who tries to change the world for the better, who tries to end war or end racism, there's so many of them end up getting killed. I just think it's really, really unfortunate that happens. I mean, like John Lennon, he wrote one of the most beautiful songs ever written, Imagine, which is kind of an anthem of world peace and tolerance, and he got killed. And, like I said, I thought prejudice was pretty much over in America in the 90s, and then we've had a huge resurgence of it. I'd say in the last 20 years, and now I think it's at its peak since I don't know when prejudice was so bad in America. I don't remember it this bad. Even when I was a kid, I mean, I told you about All in the Family. That was pretty commonplace. Even after civil rights, I wasn't alive before civil rights. Maybe it was bad before. I'm sure it was. I know about the Jim Crow laws in the South. I know about civil rights and how it ended segregation. Segregation was very bad, and at least we don't have institutionalized segregation still. But I think we're going to get it back. If Trump wins, we're going to get it back. I mean, I don't even want to think about what's going to happen if he wins. But I like to think we've made a lot of progress. I mean, I read a book a couple of years ago called "The Better Angels of Our Nature," where the author, very famous sociologist, Steven Pinker. It's a big book, about 1,200 pages or 700 pages, and he has all these statistics that show that the world's been getting better and better. We've become more and more peaceful and more tolerant. I mean, like human rights wasn't even really an issue until the middle of the 20th century. The fact that it's an issue, the fact that we're talking about it, even to me, indicates that we've made tremendous progress. And the fact we don't have slavery, I mean, things used to be really horrible. I don't think we could even imagine what the world was like just 200 years ago. So maybe we're the worst we've been during my lifetime right now in America, but we're certainly a lot better. I think we're even better than we were before civil rights. I think we're probably better than we were in the 50s in the South. I mean, we're sort of back where we were, I guess, around the beginning of civil rights right now. If Trump wins, I think we'll go even further back. Probably I don't know. I don't want to even think about how far back we'll go. It depends on what we do. Depends on, you know. But I think in my opinion, the best way, and I said I was going to talk about what we can do about prejudice. Well, if we understand the causes of it, which I think I kind of outlined, there's probably a lot more causes I haven't talked about. I haven't gone into detailed studies of the psychology of prejudice, but if the main form reason for prejudice is just just kind of blind faith in authoritarian figures who tell you that certain groups of people are inferior to others, if you just kind of go along with that, then that will make you prejudiced. If you don't do it, it won't. So, in my mind, I think the best antidote for prejudice is just thinking for yourself. Don't fall into this trap. Don't just think that a group of people, is superior or inferior to another group of people because somebody else tells you that. I mean, I think an alarm bell should be going on in your head. If anybody makes any claim of any kind that any group of people is superior to another group, just a red flag should go off immediately. I mean, if you have any common sense, you should just be telling yourself, no. Whoever's telling me this is wrong, and it doesn't matter who it is. It could be your best friend. It could be your parents. It could be your spouse. Whoever tells you this, you don't have to agree with it, no matter how close you are to them. And one thing, I mean, another issue I haven't even talked about yet. I think this is even more difficult issue than not being prejudiced. I told you how not to be prejudiced. What do you do when people who are really close to you are prejudiced? I haven't figured out how to deal with this yet. I have a couple close friends who I'm pretty sure are going to vote for Trump. One of them told me he's definitely voting for Trump. And I can't talk to him. I can't change his mind. I've tried. And I don't even think that I mean, they say politics is a taboo subject. Probably the two biggest taboo subjects in our society right now are religion and politics. I think sex used to be a taboo subject. I don't think that it's even a taboo subject anymore. We've heard so much about sex and we know so much about it now. Even kids know most about it. I don't think it's even a taboo subject anymore. But religion and politics, those are probably the two biggest taboo subjects. Better it's not to talk about it. You can do something about them, but it doesn't do any good to argue with people who disagree with you, even if they're be your best friends or your parents or your spouse. You just if you disagree with them about religion or politics, just don't talk to them about it. There's probably other issues associated with that. But anyway, I think I've said all I want to say about prejudice. And yeah, I guess I didn't talk about stereotypes. Yeah, stereotypes are just manifestations of prejudice. I think I did talk about them. Anyway, that's all I have to say for today. So thank you for watching. Keep thinking and try to be as tolerant as you can. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye.